Hello, my name is Tim Wilmot and welcome to my watercolor demo of how to turn a cloudy scene or a dark scene into a sunny one. If you live in the UK, like me, this is probably the number one challenge when painting outdoors or plein air, even in a typical summer. So in this watercolor, we'll be covering a few watercolor techniques like laying down a wash, wet in wet, blending colors, negative painting, as in around the small craft here, plus some dry brush strokes as well. I'll also take you through the normal stages I go through in a painting and cover timing. Now, those of you who've seen my previous YouTube demos will know that I paint in a loose style or impressionistic, maybe fairly averagely fast, will aim to be done in about an hour or so. So this is my reference photograph taken by me. It's a location in the UK called Porlock Weir on the Somerset coast of the UK. We're actually facing east here in this picture, and it's late afternoon in the middle of winter. This was actually taken in December. Now I know there is a bright sky, but the sun is very low, and the equivalent of this being a cloudy scene or a dark scene. We don't have any shadows to speak of, and I want to try and transform this scene into a sunnier one, a brighter one, with more shadows and contrasts of light and shade, light and dark. So what I need to think about is, where can I introduce the maximum contrast in internal values? Well, this could be this dark bridge. We could have a craft in there, so we've got the contrast between the dark bridge wall and a lighter boat in front of it, and then we've got this harbour wall here, a bit of dark retaining wall here as well. Secondly, I need to think about where will the sun be coming from, and getting my shadows right and consistent, having them all pointing in the same direction, of course, and all proportional to the height of the sun. And then from a composition point of view, I think I'm going to have something on the left hand side, maybe a figure over on the left hand side, a figure or two, because we've got a lot of interest here on the right hand side. Maybe something just to balance things on the left hand side. It could be another craft. I could have some extra craft here sort of leaning to the right, or a figure over there, as it's a bit sort of bare over there. For this demonstration, I'm using Saunders waterfall paper. This is not the surface texture is not, so it's not the rough that I have been using a lot of, and it's 300 grams in weight, or 140 pounds. The size is approximately 15 inches across by 11 inches, and the paper is held down by masking tape. I'm often asked, does your paper crinkle or warp as you paint on it? Yeah, it does do a little bit, but the masking tape secures it down. It generally stays there for the duration, and is a really good way of ensuring that your paper doesn't buckle too much and stay still. The pencil I'm using is a 3B, so quite a soft pencil. So you can see here with my reference photo down in the bottom right hand corner, I started with from the left hand side, I started with the background just very loosely drawn in, and the main line of the road and bridge on the left hand side there, and then the buildings, not exactly true to what they are in the photograph, but just giving an impression of those buildings there, that well, the main ones certainly, and that sort of larger warehouse, boatyard building on the right hand side there, the greyish one. And I think it makes quite a nice composition here, because we've got the slant of the horizon and then this little bit of water in the foreground, which is sort of balancing in a way, that sort of V shape, arrow shape, it's leading your eye into the picture. So there was boat number one, trying to get that left-hand boat there, trying to get that in the foreground, and the plan is to have the darker background contrasting with the lighter colours of the boat. And then on the right hand side we've got more of a dominant boat here, and then third boat slightly smaller, and then a smaller one on the right hand side here, almost right up against the harbour wall. Got them all pointing in the same direction, which is what you often find in a scene like this, all the boats pointing in the same direction. Just have something in the background there, just as another point of contrast. Sort of fifth boat there, and then that's the underneath the bit below the bridge would have that highlighted as well, I think. Again, trying to have a little bit of contrast. Now my figure, just loosely drawn in, I often start with the head and then quickly draw in the shoulders, and then based on that try and decide whether the figure is walking away or coming towards me, or maybe slightly walking to the side. Doing the head first and the shoulders, it often helps me decide what the orientation of that figure is going to be. Right, shadows now, all important shadows for this exercise. And because we've got a rough surface of the harbour bed here, we don't need to be too precise, too straight lines. Are very ragged and random. Now, get in some windows for the cabins. Some have got 3, some have got 2 or 1. Now a few chimney tops. I think that's it from the drawing point of view. Our outline sketch is done. So now to make a start on the painting proper. And I've got a fairly large mop brush here. This is a Raphael brush, that's the manufacturer, Raphael, called a soft aqua brush. It's a synthetic brush, and it has the behavior of some of the higher quality sable brushes, really soft. hairs. So what I'm doing here is getting in some yellow ochre, as you can see, starting with the sky and then mirrored down with the reflection in that foreground water. Now for the sky, I have to work quite quickly here to make sure that before that yellow ochre dries too much, we've added in the sky and it comes down to meet it and they blend together. I've got a slight angle on the board. It's about 10%, so the paint is travelling down a little bit with gravity. Now that bit of water in the foreground, now I should describe my palette here. From the top going down, we've got neutral tint, burnt umber, third one down, burnt sienna, then there we are, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, which I don't often use. Then I've got cobalt turquoise, or cobalt green actually, then cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, scarlet red, light red, cadmium orange and cadmium yellow. So going now with the background buildings and the hill behind the buildings. So this is going to be, things are going to dry much larger than this. This is going to be the colour of the roofs, the main colour of the roofs there. So as I was adding in that wash, I was also adding to it a bit more colour from the palette and brought it right across. Here's the background here, bit of light. So I'm carefully painting around the boats, not too precise. And this mop brush has a really nice point to it, so it's quite easy, and also has a quite flat edge as well. When there's not too much water in the brush, you can actually get quite a nice edge to it as well. So this is just the undercoat, leaving a few bare areas there of the paper, just where we might be catching a glimmer of light from the sun coming from the right hand side. So it's burnt sienna, bit of ultramarine blue. Actually going to paint over the figure. Sometimes I'll leave the sometimes I'll paint around the figure. This time I'm going to paint over it because that figure is going to be, I think that figure will be darker than the background. Then continue on the foreground on the right hand side, mixing up the colours as I go down, just so that it's not too monotonous. Bit of cobalt blue there, burnt sienna. Excuse the shake on the camera there. So just thinking now what to do next. bit more of a darker mix going. Alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue. Just while the wash is still damp, I'm adding in a bit more colour here. It's going to gradually soften down. This will all dry quite a bit lighter. So this is stage number 1, almost done here, and I need to let this dry 100% before going to the next stage, which will be the background, and we're getting into some darker colours. So to speed up the process, the drying process, I normally use a small hairdryer. And so now the paper is very, very dry. Any buckles that were there, they've flattened out as well in that drying process. So still using my big mop brush. Got a bit of blue, bit of cerulean blue there, cobalt blue. Just trying to get the right tone of that far hill. Not too precise, it doesn't matter if we leave little bits out, we can make them into buildings. So just turn my brush there and I've got that flat edge again. Use my finger here just to soften that right hand edge because that's closest to the sun. Could have used a dry brush or maybe a little bit of paper towel just to do the same thing. Or the finger, a dry finger is just as good on a small area. So a good bit darker now. There's a bit of Viridian green there. Having said at the start I don't use it very much, here I am using Viridian green, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, getting quite a darker mix for this hillside behind. So it is winter, so it's not green as such, it's more of a sort of browny greyish colour. I'm just turning the brush on the side here because there's more pigment at the bottom of the brush and the top of the brush is weaker. So in that way I can get it, making sure it's darker below than up the top. Excuse a little bit of glare there. That will obviously go when it starts drying. As I'm coming down, I want to make the colours a bit more intense, a bit darker. It's bleeding just a little bit into that far hill, which doesn't matter. So now these, we're coming up to the painting around buildings now. So this brush holds quite a lot of water, so I don't need to visit the water pot too often. It's got enough in there. Keep it going. Now we're coming up to that warehouse type building. And now and again I'm going back up, as you saw then, going back up into the hillside there, just to add a bit more pigment in. Now the side of the building, so we're leaving the roofs highlighted. Again, just picking up different colours from the palette as I'm going down. And as we come down to the harbour wall, we're not having a really good straight edge there, just leave it a little bit uneven. Go back into that hillside again, just while it's still damp. You've only got a limited time to do that. Over to the right hand edge of that warehouse, and we just let the background hill, just the wash, then just meet it. So I'm introducing a bit of light now to the right of that building, which will be again just giving the impression of some sun coming down. So now we need to start on the left hand side here and get this bridge in, which is going to be really quite a dark feature. Top of the bridge there. And the right hand side of the bridge. Now I use neutral tint to get some really dark tones going, and generally I do mix it with some other colour. It's not very often neat neutral tint. It's added to something else. So now that boat form is beginning to show. Using the flat edge again. And then over to this retaining wall. Want to try and give some impression of some supports there, these uprights that will be these heavy timbers that will be catching the light at the top. Now on the left hand side there is a small craft which we'll try and get in a blue craft. So now I'm coming down over the bed, the harbour bed, using my finger just to dab out some bits, or use a paper towel here while it's still moist or damp. Just a little bit because it is quite wet. If it was drier, you just need to hold a paper towel down for a good few seconds before lifting if it's too dry. So on with the foreground. Around the base of the boats. And as I'm going across, notice I'm leaving little areas here and there. They're going to be they could be rocks or boulders, and they'll have a little bit of shade behind them, again giving the impression of a sunny day. Now this is going to dry a little bit lighter. It all looks like a complete mess at this stage. Hopefully it'll get better. So I'm just using these different edges on this brush, a point or the flat edge or the side of the brush. Just gives, they all give different effects. Now we're coming down to the water's edge there, this little bit of water, a puddle. Alizarin crimson there, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Got a little bit darker now, a bit thicker. These will be different rocks or seaweed just protruding above the surface. I'll do a bit of flicking here. This mop brush is not the best brush for doing any splattering. A synthetic brush is a little bit better to do that. Trouble with a mop brush, it tends to hold onto the water. It's really difficult unless you give it a really good flick. You don't you get more over yourself than actually on the painting. Right, continue on that right hand edge, again leaving out little areas here and there at random, and those areas will be slightly larger in size as we come towards the foreground. pick up a bit of neutral tint, just go a bit darker. Shortcut way of getting darker. So I think I need to do a bit more splattering here, just to while the wash is moist. Careful not to get on the sky or the camera lens. Now we could do, while we're waiting, we could get in the sunny side of the holes. This is so it's not got pure white there. Be a bit too bright if we had the just left the paper blank. Using that flat edge again of the mop brush. And continue on to that smaller boat and the very small one. Now the background just beyond the bridge opening there, we need to make that a little bit darker. That was quite dry, so that's gone in okay. So my paper towel again. Let's try and think about lifting a little bit of paint, so a bit there below that hole could be a reflection, that bright side, so making that a little bit brighter. What I'm trying to do is enhance the feeling of this rough surface of mud and clay and seaweed and little stones, boulders. And then dragging it as well across the page, just to again get that feeling of that level, the levelness of it. So I think that's done. We need to let that dry totally. So now we can go in a good bit darker for the bridge. Now that everything is dry. A slightly smaller mop brush here, bit of burnt umber, and ultramarine blue, make a start. Let's try and make it a bit darker with the neutral tint. Now there is that boat on the left hand side. We'll try and get an impression of that in as we're doing this wall. Hopefully this will, getting these darks in will actually start to transform this painting and bring it to life a bit. Bit more neutral tint. So it's going to be a real big contrast with the cabin of that first boat. And then the right hand side. Neutral tint again. Generally that top mixing well I keep for the darks, and then the middle one is cooler colours, predominantly the blues, and then down the bottom generally for any warmer tints. So again with the feeling of sunlight, I'm making the left hand side of that building, making it darker. So let's introduce a nice diagonal shadow. We need to get in some dark shadows under the eaves as well. So dark left hand side to that warehouse. I spotted something that shouldn't have been there, so just as it went down I quickly went in with my finger and lifted it. Right, let's go under the eaves. Again, just giving an impression of some sunlight. And the warehouse. Maybe the hint of a window, little windows on that cottage, and shadows of the chimneys. And left hand edge of that chimney stack. So continuing on the harbour wall, let's paint around the remaining boats. And by doing this, it's going to make that right hand light area that I left, saying that was for the giving the impression of the sunlight coming through, make that stand out even more. Right, these timbers, securing that retaining wall. So let's do that left hand edge of that boat. Now let's continue on with the rest of the craft. Get the holes in first before I do their shadows, so the two will bleed together. So this is where timing is important now. Doing this all in one go, do the boat holes, and then go in as quickly as possible with their shadows. Try and get a bit of a curve on the hull of that boat, and then this last one. Now shadows. The actual surface goes uphill on the left hand side, so we need to make sure any shadows there go in that sort of direction, and then the base of the hull underneath the bridge, and that gives a bit more contrast to that left hand boat as well, with that shadow coming up to its right hand side. Now continue along with the shadow of that main central boat there. Doesn't need to be too precise. Make that small craft just a little bit darker. Go back to the shadows. And then the shadow of the wall. Not sure whether it's a bit too dark there. We'll see. So now, emphasizing the slope we've got on the left hand side, of just drawing in some shadows and different materials in there. Do a bit more, a few more stones there, shadows, just really going across the foreground now and adding in some more darks. And these lines, they just sort of emphasize the hollow in the middle from the from the slight rise on the left and the rise on the right up towards the harbour wall. Just smudge out a little bit there with my finger. Yeah, this boat is a little bit too dark. That's better. Let's just dab out a little bit more. So you can see here I'm picking up all those light areas and adding in a shadow behind them. I need to go quite a dark bit in the right corner here. It's probably seaweed or something. Alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue. So as I did with the bigger mop brush, get a nice flat edge, just do a bit of splattering. Again, careful not to get it on the sky. Not the easiest thing in the world with a small mop brush that hasn't got a lot of moisture on it. Add a bit of shadow to that far boat. Now I think we're ready for this figure. Start with the face first. So I've still got this medium-sized mop brush. I prefer to do figures with a small to medium-sized mop brush, and we're going to make this figure darker than its background. And then just an indication of legs. So once that's done, we need to get in its shadow. Pointing uphill like the boat. Make the face just a little bit darker. I think that's okay. Now some windows for the cabins. Not too precise. This one's got 3. Maybe a bit of a side one as well. Now this main one in the middle. It's got a couple. 3 and 2. I think when we did that first background hill there, I left out a blank area which now I've added a bit of shadow to, so that could be a building. So I think the cabin needs to be a bit darker on the left hand side, and that one. Add a bit of shadow beyond the bridge. That will emphasize that light band in the middle. Now, change for my small synthetic brush. And we're getting a few more boat details. So a line across the hull. It's almost a dry brush stroke this. Not much moisture on the brush. Getting in the dark water line. Shouldn't say waterline, it's the base of the base of the hull. Now do a couple of lines on this one. And then all in one. On that third boat. And then let's do this smaller one. Let's go back and finish this one all in one go. So while I've got this small brush, I can just add in a few more textural details on the foreground. And get in a few more lines on that retaining wall to give the impression of some planks and timbers there. Now going across the surface are lots of ropes and chains and things. I want to give the impression of a few of those. So not a continuous line, just here and there, little dabs where half of the chain is probably sunk into the mud. The rest of it protruding out. Just take it over to the right hand side. Now there aren't too many posts in the photograph, but I'm just going to introduce a few. This hull needs to be a little bit darker there with that band going across. Now I need to get in that blue boat, left hand side. So when I've got a bit of blue on that brush, just dabbed around in a few areas. Right, got the hairdryer, cut out the noise of the hairdryer, make sure everything's really dry now before I go in with the details of some ropes and a few masts maybe. Gotta make sure everything is really dry. This is quite a small hairdryer. I find the smaller ones are a lot easier to use than a big one. Okay, should be nice and dry now. So still on with a small synthetic brush and getting into some highlight details now and some ropes and mast details. This is almost neat white gouache straight out of the tube. Hardly any water added to it at all. Now with a really flat edge on this brush, gently try and get a nice curve. A few more mask details. There's some kind of tool mast above that warehouse building. As it is a sunny scene, we need to get in a few highlights there, like I did on the figure. And let's get something across that blue boat in the distance. And a few dabs on those chains or ropes as it's catching the light. Then take it into the shadows. Little dot there for the nose. And maybe just a few dabs for the windows, just a few. Some rails on that bigger craft, and then a few more ropes, dragging them across darker areas. Then a few going up to the side. I think we're nearly there, just adding on finer details now. I need to get a window on the side of that boat. I think what they need now are some fenders on the sides of the boats. I think they're generally going to be white. So just indicating those just with a quick quick dab. Again, it's almost pure paint out the tube. I think we need another colour in there. Maybe some red, yeah, red. Let's go for a bright red, cadmium red here. Frequently in scenes like this you've got some balls, again fenders in a red colour, so let's just get in a few of those. Change my mind on the figure while I've got that red. Add a bit of a brighter face to that person walking towards us. So I think we are done. So here is the finished painting. I've cropped it just a little bit because of the screen orientation I'm using, but I think we succeeded with getting a bit more light into the picture. How do we do that? Well, we've got areas of contrast between the hilltop, the mountain, or the sorry, the hill, the background hill, and the bright rooftops, and then that angular shadow on that building almost in the middle there. That gave the impression of some sun coming through. That on the right hand side above the wall there's that lighter area, and then the boats themselves contrasting, their lighter cabins contrasting with the darker background. Get some shadows in there, and remember the way I did the shadows, I did the hull of the boats first and then quickly went in with their shadows. And a scene like this with a harbour at low tide, we've got lots of stones and rigging lying across the surface, so we can add in some shadows behind those, again emphasizing, giving the impression of some strong sunlight. And I went in at the end, I went in with my white, pure white paint. You can use any white. I use white gouache, fairly thickly, very rarely watered down, but then that again allows me to go over the darker areas once everything's completely dry. Make sure everything's completely dry before you do this, and add in those masks and the ropes. So thanks very much for watching. If you want to see more of my paintings, please go to my website www.timwilmot.com, TIMWILMOT.com, and hopefully catch up with you soon on my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.